What happens when a fairy tale wedding turns into a public nightmare? Jennifer Parker was living that dream. An accomplished architect, pregnant with her first child, and about to marry Mark Ashford, the handsome heir to a billion-dollar fortune. The dress was perfect. The venue was a palace, but a cold feeling she couldn't shake told her something was terribly wrong. She was right. Because as she walked down the aisle, a woman stepped out from the crowd. A beautiful, furious woman Jennifer had never seen before. And in front of everyone, with the groom's billionaire father, watching in chilling silence, the woman's hand cracked across Jennifer's face, a slap that would shatter everything. This isn't just a story about a cheating groom. This is a story about secrets, lies, and a powerful father's cruelest test. Jennifer Parker took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of 1,000 white roses and lilies filling her lungs. The air in the bridal suite of the Ashford estate was thick with it, a sweet, almost suffocating perfume that mirrored her feelings exactly. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The dress, a custom Vera Wang creation of cascading silk and intricate lace, felt less like a gown and more like beautiful, expensive armor. Her reflection in the ornate floor-to-ceiling mirror showed a woman who should be ecstatic. Her soft brown hair was swept into an elegant chignon. Her makeup was flawless, and the gentle swell of her 4-month pregnancy was just visible beneath the gown's empire waistline. She was marrying Mark Ashford, and yet an icy dread had been coiling in her stomach for weeks. She met Mark 2 years ago, not at a gala or a charity auction, but at a construction site. Jennifer was the lead architect on a new sustainable skyscraper project, and Mark, trying to prove his worth outside the family business, was a junior project manager. He was charming, genuinely funny, and seemed utterly unfazed by her ambition. He'd shown up with 2 coffees on a rainy Tuesday, and their love story felt real, grounded, built on shared blueprints and late-night talks, not trust funds. The problems began when he introduced her to his father. Robert Ashford was not a man. He was an institution, a titan of industry with a portfolio spanning from technology to global shipping. He had a presence that sucked the air out of any room he entered. He had looked at Jennifer not as his son's partner, but as a balance sheet. He assessed her pedigree or lack thereof. Her education impressive, but not from the right schools, and her career a respectable profession, but not an inheritance. She could feel him deeming her a liability. An architect, he had said during their first dinner, the words clipped and sterile. A noble pursuit, for those who must build things with their hands. The insult was subtle, a silken dagger slid between her ribs. He saw her as the help. Mark, bless him, had tried. Dad, Jennifer is one of the most respected young architects in the country. She's brilliant. Robert had only smiled, a reptilian curl of the lips that didn't reach his cold grey eyes. Of course, my son has eclectic tastes. From then on, Jennifer felt like an outsider on a permanent audition. Every dinner was a test, every conversation a cross-examination. Robert Ashford's disapproval was a constant low-frequency hum beneath the surface of her relationship with Mark. When she and Mark announced their engagement, followed shortly by the news of her pregnancy, Robert's congratulations were delivered with the warmth of a foreclosure notice. An heir, he'd stated, looking past Jennifer directly at his son. The Ashford line must continue. We will ensure the child has everything it needs. He spoke of her baby as if it were a corporate asset, another entry in the family ledger. Now, on her wedding day, that feeling of being an unwelcome acquisition was overwhelming. Her own family, a loving, middle-class clan from Ohio, seemed utterly lost in the sea of opulence. Her father, a retired history teacher, kept marveling at the 18th century tapestries, while her mother fretted about spilling something on the Persian rugs. They were good, honest people, and Jennifer could see the discomfort in their eyes, the feeling of being out of their depth. They were here for her, but they didn't belong in this world, and a terrifying part of her knew that she didn't either. "You look beautiful, Jenny," her best friend and maid of honor, Chloe, said, coming to stand beside her. Chloe, a sharp-witted journalist who never minced words, had been skeptical of the Ashfords from day one. "I feel like I'm about to be sworn into a royal family that hates me," Jennifer whispered, her voice trembling lightly. Chloe squeezed her shoulder. "Hey, you're not marrying the family. You're marrying Mark. He loves you. That's the only thing that matters." But did it? Lately, Mark had been distant. He was stressed, he'd said, trying to manage his father's expectations for the wedding. But it felt like more than that. There were hushed phone calls he would end abruptly when she entered the room, and a haunted, distracted look in his eyes that hadn't been there before. When she'd tried to talk to him about it, he'd just kissed her forehead and said, "It's just my father, Jen. He's being his usual controlling self. After we're married, it'll all be different. I promise." A soft knock echoed through the suite. A footman in a crisp uniform entered. "Madam, it is time." Jennifer's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she was supposed to feel nothing but joy. She took one last look in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was beautiful, successful, and pregnant with the child of the man she loved. So why did she look so much like a prisoner walking to her own execution? Chloe handed her the bouquet of white peonies. Her hands were shaking so badly, she was afraid she might drop them. As she walked toward the grand staircase that would lead her down to the garden, where 300 of the world's most powerful people were waiting, she caught a glimpse of Robert Ashford standing in the main hall below. He was looking up at her, his face an unreadable mask of granite. He wasn't smiling. He was just watching, waiting. And in that moment, the coil of dread in her stomach tightened into a knot of pure terror. She felt with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she wasn't walking toward a new beginning. She was walking into a trap. The music began a string quartet, playing a classical piece that was probably priceless, but felt generic and hollow to Jennifer. The great oak doors to the garden swung open, revealing a scene of impossible splendor. A white carpet stretched down a long aisle, flanked by towering arrangements of flowers, leading to a floral arch under which Mark stood, looking impossibly handsome in his Tom Ford tuxedo. The guests, a glittering assembly of CEOs, politicians, and socialites, turned in their seats, their faces a blur of polite smiles. Jennifer's father linked his arm through hers, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "You'll be all right, sweetheart," he murmured, though she could hear the tremor in his own voice. Her eyes found Mark's. He offered her a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. They were filled with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Was it nervousness or was it fear? He looked pale beneath his tan, his posture rigid. Beside him, his father, Robert Ashford, stood as his best man. It was an odd choice, one Robert had insisted upon, claiming it was a family tradition. He wasn't looking at his son. His gaze was fixed laser-like on Jennifer as she began her slow procession down the aisle. Each step felt like wading through molasses. The polite smiles of the guests felt like leers. The opulent flowers seemed to mock her with their silent, perfect beauty. Her focus narrowed to Mark, a life raft in a hostile sea. Just get to him, she told herself. Once I'm with him, everything will be okay. She was halfway down the aisle when the first ripple of disturbance occurred. A murmur started in the back rows, a sibilant whisper that grew into a low buzz of confusion. Heads began to turn, not toward Jennifer, but toward the side of the aisle. Jennifer's steps faltered. Her father's grip on her arm tightened, and then she saw her. A woman stepped out from between two massive floral urns, moving with a predatory grace. She was stunning in a way that was both intimidating and infuriating, tall with a cascade of raven-black hair, sharp, intelligent eyes, and a figure poured into a blood-red dress that was scandalously inappropriate for a wedding. She looked directly at Jennifer, her expression a cocktail of contempt and triumph. Jennifer had never seen this woman before in her life. She glanced at Mark, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. His eyes were wide with what could only be described as pure, unadulterated panic. He knew her. Oh God, he knew her. The woman stopped directly in Jennifer's path, blocking the aisle. The string quartet, sensing the shift in mood, faltered, the music dying in a discordant squeak. A heavy, shocked silence fell over the 300 guests. "Going somewhere?" the woman asked, her voice low, but carrying with lethal clarity in the stillness. Her eyes raked over Jennifer's gown, lingering for a moment on the subtle curve of her belly, with a sneer. Jennifer was too stunned to speak. Her father stepped forward protectively. "Excuse me, miss. I think you're in the— I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," the woman snapped, never taking her eyes off Jennifer. She then looked past her toward the altar. "Aren't I Mark?" Mark looked like he was about to be sick. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The woman's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Don't you have anything to say? You can't just block my number and pretend I don't exist. That's not how this works." Jennifer's mind was spinning. Block her number. The hushed phone calls, the distracted silences, it all crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. This was his secret. This woman was his secret. Who are you?" Jennifer finally managed to whisper the words, feeling like shards of glass in her throat. The woman laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Who am I? My name is Victoria Stratton, and I'm the woman he was with last week. And the week before that, and the week before that, I'm the woman he tells he loves when he's not playing house with his pregnant little project." The term "little project" hit Jennifer with surgical precision. It was what Robert Ashford had called her work, once a condescending dismissal of her career. The venom in Victoria's voice felt rehearsed, targeted. Jennifer's gaze darted from the fury in Victoria's face to the absolute terror in Mark's, and then instinctively to Robert Ashford. The billionaire hadn't moved a muscle. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't angry. He wasn't rushing to control the situation. He was simply watching his expression, cold, clinical, like a scientist observing a chemical reaction he had set in motion. And in that horrifying moment of clarity, Jennifer understood. He knew. He had known all along. This wasn't a random interruption. This was an execution. "Mark!" Jennifer's voice was a plea. A desperate final appeal for the man she thought she loved, to say something, to deny it, to fix it. Mark just stood there, paralyzed by a mixture of cowardice and shock, his eyes darting between Jennifer Victoria and his father. Victoria saw his weakness and pounced. "He's not going to defend you," she spat at Jennifer. "Why would he? You're a temporary arrangement, a convenient incubator for the Ashford heir. Did you really think this was about love?" She took another step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, poison-laced whisper. He doesn't love you. He loves the idea of defying his father. But he's too weak to ever actually do it. And I'm not the only one who knows it." She then did something that defied all comprehension. She looked Jennifer dead in the eye, her face a mask of incandescent rage, and said, "And here's another thing you should know." Then, with a swift, vicious movement, Victoria Stratton raised her hand. The sound of her palm cracking against Jennifer's cheek echoed through the silent garden like a gunshot. Jennifer's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow, a stunned, searing pain erupting on her skin. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her father lurched forward with a cry of outrage, but it was too late. The slap wasn't just a physical assault. It was a branding, a public declaration of her humiliation. Jennifer stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock and brimming with tears. Through the haze of pain and disbelief, her gaze found Robert Ashford again. He was still there, still watching. And now, for the first time, an emotion flickered across his face. It was not pity. It was not horror. It was a look of profound, chilling satisfaction. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. For a long, suspended moment after the slap, the only sound was the frantic beating of Jennifer's own heart in her ears. The stinging on her cheek was a hot, spreading stain of shame. She could feel 300 pairs of eyes on her, not with sympathy but with a morbid, hungry curiosity. She was no longer a bride. She was a spectacle. Her father was the first to react, his face purple with rage. "Get away from my daughter!" he roared, moving to put himself between Jennifer and Victoria. Victoria didn't even flinch. She simply held her ground, her chest heaving, her eyes still blazing with a righteous fury that Jennifer couldn't comprehend. It was the look of a woman who believed she was the one who had been wronged. But Jennifer's eyes weren't on Victoria. They were locked on Mark. He stood frozen at the altar, a statue carved from indecision. He looked at her, his mouth agape, his face a canvas of pathetic helplessness. He should have been the first to move, the first to shield her, the first to roar in her defense. He should have crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and stood by her side. But he didn't. He just stood there, trapped in the headlights of a disaster he had created. The silence that followed the initial gasps was more damning than any accusation. It was a vacuum filled only by the weight of unspoken judgments. In that silence, Mark's inaction was a confession. It was an admission of guilt, of weakness, of betrayal. Every second that he remained rooted to his spot next to his father was another nail in the coffin of their relationship. Then the second shoe dropped, and it was a bombshell. Victoria, seemingly emboldened by the lack of resistance, took a step back and placed a hand protectively over her own flat stomach. "You think your baby makes you special?" She sneered at Jennifer, her voice dripping with scorn. "You think that little bump gives you a claim? Well, I have news for you and for everyone." She turned her head, projecting her voice to the horrified guests. "I'm pregnant too. With Mark's baby." A collective audible gasp swept through the crowd. This time a wave of shock and scandal. This was no longer just an affair. It was a dynasty-level crisis. 2 women, both claiming to be pregnant by the Ashford heir. Jennifer felt the ground give way beneath her. The strength drained from her legs, and her vision swam. The word pregnant echoed in her mind, a cruel, mocking refrain. It couldn't be true. It was a lie. It had to be. She looked at Mark, her eyes begging him, pleading with him to refute it. Mark finally broke his paralysis. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised in a useless, placating gesture. "Victoria, don't. Please. This isn't the time or the place." "Isn't it?" she shrieked, her composure cracking, to reveal a raw, desperate pain beneath the anger. "When is the right time, Mark? When you're on your honeymoon? When your child with her is born? You told me you would handle this. You told me you loved me. You swore you were going to leave her." Every word was a fresh stab to Jennifer's heart. She felt dizzy, nauseous. Her protective hand went to her own stomach, a desperate maternal instinct to shield her unborn child from the toxicity that had just poisoned their world. Chloe, her face a mask of fury, finally broke through the paralysis that had gripped the wedding party. She rushed to Jennifer's side, throwing a protective arm around her. "That's enough," she yelled at Victoria. "Get the hell out of here." But the real power was not with the hysterical mistress or the supportive friend. It was at the altar. Robert Ashford finally moved. He didn't rush forward. He didn't raise his voice. He simply took one deliberate step toward his son and placed a calm, firm hand on his shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was a gesture of control. An anchor reminding Mark where his true allegiance lay. Robert's voice, when it came, was quiet, but carried the effortless authority of a man used to commanding boardrooms and bending governments to his will. "Security," he said, not shouting, but with a tone that brooked no argument. Two large men in dark suits, previously inconspicuous, materialized and began to move purposefully toward Victoria. Victoria saw them coming and seemed to deflate slightly, a flicker of fear in her eyes. But she had one last piece of venom to spit. She looked directly at Robert Ashford. "You can't get rid of me, Robert," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You know it. This is your grandchild, too." Robert's expression didn't change. He gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod to the security guards. They reached Victoria and took her by the arms. She didn't struggle violently, but allowed herself to be escorted away, casting one last look of pure hatred back at Jennifer. The immediate threat was gone, but the devastation remained. The garden was a wasteland of shattered dreams and public humiliation. The guests were whispering furiously, their phones no doubt already buzzing with the biggest high society scandal of the decade. Jennifer, leaning heavily on Chloe, finally looked at Mark again. His father still had a hand on his shoulder, a human leash. The son looked at the bride, his eyes full of a pathetic apology. "Jen, I can explain." But what was there to explain? The truth was laid bare on the white aisle runner, as ugly and undeniable as a bloodstain. And as Jennifer looked at the man she was about to marry, she didn't see the charming, funny partner from the construction site. She saw a weak, terrified boy, utterly owned by the cold, silent man, standing beside him. The love she had felt for him curdled into a nauseating mix of pity and disgust. The world started to spin faster. Black spots danced in her vision. The stress, the shock, the public humiliation, it was too much. A sharp, cramping pain shot through her abdomen, a terrifying physical manifestation of her emotional agony. I don't feel well," she gasped, her hand tightening on Chloe's arm. Her legs gave out completely, and as she collapsed, the last thing she saw before the world went black was Robert Ashford's face. He was still watching her, his expression utterly unmoved, as if he were merely observing the final successful stage of a meticulously planned demolition. Jennifer awoke to the sterile scent of antiseptic and the soft rhythmic beep of a machine. For a blissful second, she thought the wedding had been a nightmare. But the dull throb on her cheek and the heavy, leaden feeling in her heart told her it was all horrifyingly real. She was in a bed, not in her bridal suite, but in a quiet, private room. The opulent Vera Wang gown was gone, replaced by a simple, soft cotton nightgown. Chloe was sitting in a chair by the bed, her face etched with worry. "Hey," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Welcome back." "The baby," Jennifer whispered, her first conscious thought a surge of panic. "Is the baby okay?" "The baby's fine," Chloe said immediately, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "You have a strong little fighter in there. The doctor said you collapsed from acute stress and dehydration. They want to keep you for observation, but you're both stable. You just gave us all a massive scare." Relief washed over Jennifer so intensely it left her weak. The baby was safe. For now, that was all that mattered. The memory of the cramping pain returned, a phantom echo of the terror she had felt. She had been so scared of losing the one pure thing in this entire mess. "Where are we?" she asked, looking around the well-appointed room. It was clearly a hospital, but a luxurious one. "The Ashford wing of St. Jude's Medical Center," Chloe said with a wry, bitter twist of her lips. "Of course. He owns the damn place. Makes it easier to control the narrative." He, Jennifer knew, meant Robert. "Where's Mark?" Chloe hesitated, her expression darkening. "He tried to come in. I wouldn't let him. Neither would your father. He's pacing in the hallway like a lost puppy. A lost, spineless, cheating puppy." Jennifer closed her eyes, a fresh wave of pain, emotional, not physical, washing over her. Mark, his paralysis at the altar, his father's hand on his shoulder. Victoria's screaming accusations. "I'm pregnant too." "Is it true?" Jennifer asked, her voice barely audible. "Is she?" "We don't know," Chloe admitted. "But honestly, Jenny, at this point, does it matter? True or not, what Mark did? What he allowed to happen to you? That's the part that's unforgivable." Jennifer knew she was right. The potential second baby was just a symptom of the disease. The disease was Mark's weakness and his family's toxicity. A quiet knock on the door made them both look up. It wasn't a nurse. It was Robert Ashford, standing in the doorway, in his perfectly tailored suit, looking as immaculate and unruffled as if he'd just come from a board meeting. There was no trace of concern on his face, only a quiet, unnerving calm. Chloe shot to her feet. "You are not welcome here," she said, her voice low and fierce. Robert ignored her completely, his grey eyes fixed on Jennifer. "I need a moment alone with Jennifer," he stated, not asked. "Not a chance in hell," Chloe shot back. "Chloe, it's okay," Jennifer said, her own voice surprising her with its steadiness. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. She wanted to hear what this monster had to say. She needed to look him in the eye. "Can you give us 5 minutes?" Chloe looked like she wanted to argue, but she saw the new hard glint in Jennifer's eyes and reluctantly nodded. "I'll be right outside the door. You scream and I'm coming in with a chair." She shot one last venomous glare at Robert before exiting and closing the door behind her. The silence in the room was heavy, charged. Robert Ashford walked to the foot of the bed, his hands clasped behind his back. He surveyed her with the dispassionate air of someone examining a damaged asset. "I trust the care is satisfactory." He began, his tone polite and utterly devoid of warmth. "Cut the crap, Robert," Jennifer said, her voice raw. Did you know she was going to be there?" He didn't flinch or deny it. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Victoria Stratton is the daughter of a long-time business associate, a very passionate and volatile young woman. I was aware that she was distraught over Mark's decision to marry you. I could not, however, predict the specifics of her public display. It was a masterclass in evasion. He admitted knowledge without admitting culpability. You wanted this to happen. Jennifer stated the realization hitting her with absolute certainty. You watched that woman sap your son's pregnant fiancée, and you did nothing. You enjoyed it. Enjoyment is an irrelevant emotion, he replied coolly. What I observed was the logical outcome of a poor decision. I warned my son that a union with you would bring complications. You are not equipped for our world, Jennifer. Your background, your emotional constitution, it's all wrong. Today was merely a public demonstration of that fact. The sheer arrogance, the cold-blooded cruelty of his words stole her breath. He was blaming her for being assaulted. So what now? She asked, her hands curling into fists under the blanket. You've successfully humiliated me. You've broken up the wedding. What's the next item on your agenda? He walked over to the bedside table and placed a sleek, dark leather portfolio on it. He opened it. Inside was a single document and a pen. This is a severance agreement, he said, his voice flat. It offers you a settlement of $10 million. It also provides a fully furnished home in any city of your choosing in the United States, excluding New York, and a monthly stipend for the child's care that is, shall we say, extraordinarily generous. The funds will be placed in a trust managed by my people. Jennifer stared at the papers, then back at his face. A severance agreement. I'm not one of your employees. Aren't you? He countered smoothly. You were for a time contracted to provide an heir. The contract is now terminated, but I am a man who honors his financial obligations. The $10 million is for your silence and your immediate and permanent departure from my son's life. You will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and you will relocate within 30 days. The child, of course, will carry the Ashford name. My lawyers will arrange visitation schedules when it is of an appropriate age. He was buying her off. He was buying her baby. He was trying to erase her to pay for her silence and her pain as if she were a line item in his budget. The insult was so profound, so dehumanizing, that a strange, wild calm descended upon Jennifer. The fear was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was a core of pure, unadulterated rage. She slowly pushed herself up her eyes, never leaving his. You think you can buy my child? You think you can put a price on what happened today? I am a practical man, Robert said. Everything has a price. This is a very generous offer. It will allow you to live a life of comfort and security, free from the pressures you are so clearly unable to handle. It is in fact the best possible outcome for you. Jennifer looked at the pen lying next to the contract. She thought of Mark's weakness, of Victoria's screaming, of the slap, of the public shame. And she thought of the tiny, resilient life inside her. This child would not be raised in the shadow of this man. This child would not be another asset for Robert Ashford to control. With a sudden, swift movement, she reached out, grabbed the portfolio, and flung it across the room. The papers scattered across the floor. "Get out!" she said, her voice shaking with fury. "Get out of my room!" Robert Ashford watched the papers flutter to the ground, his expression unchanged. He seemed neither surprised nor angered by her outburst. He simply gave a small, almost pitying sigh. "You are being emotional," he said, turning to leave. "A regrettable but predictable feminine trait. The offer stands for 24 hours. After that, I will be forced to assume you prefer a more adversarial resolution." And I assure you, Jennifer, you do not want me as an adversary. You have no idea what you would be up against." He closed the door behind him, leaving Jennifer alone in the suffocating silence, the unsigned contract lying on the floor like a declaration of war. He was right about one thing. She had no idea what she was up against. But in that moment, she also knew with a fire she didn't know she possessed that he had no idea what he had just unleashed in her. The 24 hours of Robert Ashford's ultimatum passed in a blur of doctor's tears and a simmering, clarifying rage. Jennifer's parents arrived, their faces a mixture of fury and helplessness. Her father, a man who believed in decency and honor, could barely speak about Robert Ashford without his voice trembling. Her mother just held her, stroking her hair and whispering reassurances that they would figure everything out. Mark had tried to get into the room a dozen more times. He sent flowers, a massive, tasteless bouquet of roses that Jennifer had a nurse throw out immediately. He sent text messages, a pathetic torrent of "I'm so sorry, please let me explain, and it's not what you think." Each message was a testament to his own cowardice. He couldn't even face her. He was hiding behind a screen, just as he had hidden behind his father at the altar. Jennifer refused to see him. She refused to speak to him. There was nothing to say. She had seen everything she needed to see in his frozen inaction. The man she thought she loved didn't exist. He was a phantom, a charming facade built on a foundation of fear. On the second day, the doctor discharged her with strict instructions for bed rest and zero stress. A laughable prescription under the circumstances. Chloe and her parents helped her pack her few things. There was no question of returning to the lavish apartment she had shared with Mark. It was his, a gilded cage owned by his father. Instead, Chloe took her back to her own small, cluttered but safe apartment in Brooklyn. Stepping into Chloe's apartment was like coming up for air after nearly drowning. It was real. There were stacks of books, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table, and the smell of brewing coffee. There was no cold marble, no intimidating art, no sense of being constantly watched and judged. "The first thing we need to do," Chloe said, setting down Jennifer's bag, "is get you a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a shark. Someone who eats men like Robert Ashford for breakfast." Jennifer sank onto the sofa, the exhaustion hitting her like a physical weight. A lawyer for what, Chloe? To sue them for? What, being horrible people? For public humiliation, he'd bury me in legal fees. He owns half the judges in New York. He said it himself, I don't want him as an adversary. "So what's the alternative?" Chloe demanded, kneeling in front of her. "You just take it. You let him win. You let him dictate the terms for your child's life." "No, Jenny. That's not you. You're a fighter. You're the woman who went head-to-head with a misogynistic developer and won." Jennifer looked down at her hands. Chloe was right. She wasn't a victim. She was an architect. She built things. She designed systems. She understood structure, stress points, and foundations. Robert Ashford thought he had built an impenetrable fortress. But every fortress had a weakness. "You're right," Jennifer said slowly, a new resolve hardening in her voice. "Fighting him in a courtroom is a losing game. He controls that world, but he doesn't control everything. I need to think. I need to build a new plan." For the next few days, Jennifer did what she did best. She analyzed the problem from every angle. She didn't want Robert's money. The $10 million offer was an insult, a way to quantify her silence and pain. What she wanted was something he valued more than money control. She wanted to take it away from him. She wanted to ensure that he would have no power over her or her child, ever. The key, she realized, was Mark. Robert's entire plan hinged on his son's obedience. He believed Mark was weak enough to eventually fall in line, marry the right woman, presumably Victoria, if her pregnancy was real, and continue the dynasty. Robert had orchestrated the wedding disaster to sever the tie between Jennifer and Mark, confident his son would crawl back to him. But what if Mark didn't? Jennifer thought back over the past 2 years. She remembered countless conversations, moments of vulnerability. Mark, for all his weakness, hated his father's control. He felt suffocated by it. And in moments of frustration, often after a few drinks, he would talk. He'd complain about the pressure, about the shady corners of the Ashford empire he was expected to one day manage. A specific memory surfaced hazy at first, then sharpening into focus. It was about 6 months ago. Mark had come home late from a business trip to Switzerland, looking pale and stressed. He'd poured himself a large scotch and started venting about a deal his father was forcing through. "It's dirty, Jen." He'd slurred his guard completely down. "It's this thing he calls Project Nightingale. It's some offshore shell corporation scheme to bypass international sanctions on a new technology. It's brilliant and completely illegal. If it ever came out, it would ruin him. It would bring down the whole house of cards." At the time, she'd dismissed it as drunken paranoia. She'd put him to bed and forgotten about it. But now the words echoed in her mind. Project Nightingale. A house of cards. Could this be it? A secret so damaging it could give her leverage. It was a long shot. Mark had been drunk, possibly exaggerating. But it was a thread. "Chloe," Jennifer said, her voice electric with a new, dangerous energy, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to use your journalism skills and dig into something. It's called Project Nightingale." Chloe's eyes widened. "What is it?" I think it's the weakness in the foundation." While Chloe started digging, using her network of sources and her skills in navigating the dark corners of financial reporting, Jennifer focused on the other piece of the puzzle, Victoria Stratton. There was something about Victoria's performance at the wedding that felt off. The anger was real, certainly, but the announcement of her pregnancy felt theatrical, a perfectly timed bombshell designed for maximum impact. And Robert's complete lack of surprise suggested he knew it was coming. Was it possible it was all a lie, a performance they had orchestrated together? "Chloe, can you find out everything you can about Victoria Stratton?" Jennifer asked. "Social life, recent trips, friends. Look at her social media, her friends' accounts. Everything." Chloe, a master of the digital deep dive, got to work. 2 days later, she came back with a triumphant look on her face. Bingo. She turned her laptop around. On the screen was an Instagram photo from a friend of Victoria's posted just 10 days before the wedding. It was a picture of a group of women on a yacht in Miami celebrating a bachelorette party. In the center was Victoria Stratton, laughing, holding a bottle of champagne in one hand and a lit cigarette in the other. In another photo from the same day, she was doing tequila shots. This is 10 days before she stood in front of 300 people and claimed to be pregnant with Mark's baby. Chloe said, her voice grim. "Now, I'm no doctor, but I'm pretty sure chain smoking and doing tequila shots aren't on the recommended list for expectant mothers." Jennifer stared at the picture. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was a massive crack in Victoria's story. It was ammunition, a lie. A cruel, calculated lie they had used to destroy her. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Robert and Victoria had likely conspired. They had invented a pregnancy to manipulate Mark, to give him a valid reason to leave the unsuitable Jennifer. The public confrontation was designed to humiliate her so thoroughly that she would have no choice but to take the money and disappear. But they had underestimated her. They saw her as an emotional, weak woman. They didn't see the architect, the builder. They didn't realize that when you try to demolish a building, you have to be prepared for the architect to use the rubble to build something stronger in its place. That night, for the first time in a week, Jennifer picked up her phone. She scrolled through the dozens of pathetic texts from Mark and finally typed a reply. It was short and to the point. "We need to talk, not on the phone, face to face. Meet me at the first place we ever met. The construction site, tomorrow, 10 p.m. Come alone. If I see anyone from your father's security, I'm gone. This is your last chance, Mark. Your very last chance to decide who you are." She hit send. Now all she could do was wait and see if the weak, frightened boy she saw at the altar had any shred of the man she once loved left inside him. Her entire plan depended on it. The half-finished skyscraper loomed against the night sky, a skeleton of steel and concrete. It was their place, the place where it had all felt real and simple before the complexities of the Ashford billions had poisoned everything. Jennifer stood on the 20th floor, an open-air concrete slab that offered a breathtaking, wind-swept view of the city lights. She wore simple jeans and a dark jacket, a stark contrast to the memory of the wedding gown. She felt more herself here amongst the rebar and dust than she ever had in the Ashford mansion. She heard the whine of the construction elevator, and a moment later Mark stepped out onto the floor. He looked haggard. His expensive suit was rumpled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He stopped about 20 feet away from her, his hands shoved into his pockets, looking like a teenager called to the principal's office. "Jen," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for seeing me. I've been going out of my mind." "Have you?" Jennifer asked, her tone flat and cold. "Or has your father been keeping you busy?" He flinched. "This is not his fault." Jennifer let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Not his fault, Mark," he watched. "He stood there and watched as that woman assaulted me, and he did nothing. He knew she was coming. Don't you dare lie to me. Not anymore." Mark had the grace to look ashamed. He looked down at his feet. "I didn't know she was going to do that. I swear. I knew she was upset. My father, he said he would handle her. He said he'd make sure she didn't cause a scene." "He handled it all right," Jennifer retorted. "He aimed her like a missile and fired. He wanted to destroy me, to humiliate me so completely that you would have no choice but to come crawling back to him." "It's complicated," Mark mumbled, the pathetic catch-all excuse of a weak man. "No, it's not," Jennifer snapped, taking a step toward him. The wind whipped a strand of hair across her face. "It's simple. You have a choice. It's the same choice you had when you were standing on that altar. You can choose him, or you can choose me and your child. You failed the test once, Mark. This is your chance to retake it, but first you're going to tell me the truth. Everything." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "Jen, I love you." "Don't." She cut him off. "Don't say that. Love is an action. It's what you do in the moment of crisis. What you did was nothing. Now talk. Start with Victoria." He finally broke. The story came tumbling out, a messy, shameful confession. Victoria Stratton was his ex-girlfriend from years ago, a relationship his father had always approved of. They had reconnected a few months back at a function. Mark, feeling smothered by his father's wedding planning, and Jennifer's growing unease had stupidly sought comfort in the familiar. It started as a drink, then a dinner. It became a mistake, a full-blown affair he was too cowardly to end. "I tried to break it off," he said, his voice cracking, "a few weeks before the wedding. I told her it was over, that I was in love with you and we were having a baby. She went crazy. She threatened to tell you everything. I panicked. I told my father." "Of course you did," Jennifer said, her voice dripping with contempt. "He told me not to worry." Mark continued, wringing his hands. "He said he would take care of it. He met with her. He told me she'd agreed to be discreet in exchange for a generous settlement. He looked me in the eye and promised me she wouldn't be at the wedding." Jennifer saw the whole chessboard now. Robert had never intended to pay Victoria for her silence. He'd paid her for her performance. He'd found the perfect weapon to detonate his son's life and rebuild it to his own specifications. "And the baby?" Jennifer asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Is she pregnant?" Mark looked utterly lost. "She told me she was, right after I tried to break it off. That's when I really panicked. I didn't know what to do. A part of me... God, Jen, I'm so sorry. A part of me thought maybe my father was right, that everything would be easier if you just did what you were told." Jennifer finished for him. She pulled out her phone and walked toward him. She held it up, displaying the photo of Victoria on the yacht, drinking and smoking. "This was taken 10 days before our wedding," she said. "Does that look like a pregnant woman to you, Mark?" He stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. The realization dawned on him, the depth of the manipulation, the scale of the lie he had been caught in. He looked from the phone to Jennifer's face, his expression crumbling from guilt into horror. "He played me," he whispered. "My own father. He used her. He lied to me." "He did what he always does," Jennifer said, her voice hard as steel. "He controlled the situation to get the outcome he wanted. The question is, are you going to let him keep doing it?" He sank onto a pile of construction materials, his head in his hands. "What can I do? He controls everything. My job, my trust fund, my whole life." "You can walk away," Jennifer said simply. "You can choose to be a man instead of his heir. You can choose to be a father to our child on our terms." She took a deep breath. It was time to play her final card. "Do you remember a night about 6 months ago?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "You came back from a trip. You were drunk and you were angry with your father. You told me about something called Project Nightingale." Mark's head shot up. The look on his face was no longer just horror. It was stark terror. "No," he breathed. "Jen, you can't. You don't know what you're talking about. That could destroy him. It could destroy everything." "I know," Jennifer said calmly. "He tried to destroy me. He tried to take my child. He declared war, Mark, not me. But I will not show up to a gunfight with a strongly worded letter. I will use any weapon I have to protect my baby." She knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet her gaze. Her eyes were not filled with hatred, but with a fierce, unwavering resolve. "This is the choice, Mark, right here, right now. There are 2 paths. On one path, you go back to him. You become his puppet, marry the woman he chooses, and you live in that gilded cage for the rest of your life. You'll see our child on weekends his lawyers deem appropriate, and you will always know you are a coward. Or," she continued, her voice softening slightly, "you can take the other path. With me. We walk away from all of it. The money, the name, everything. I have my career. You're smart. You can build something of your own, something clean. We'll have a life, a real one. It will be hard, but it will be ours, and we will raise our child together far away from that poison." She stood up, leaving the choice hanging in the air between them. The wind whistled through the steel beams of the unfinished building, a lonely, mournful sound. "He gave me an ultimatum," she said, turning to look out at the city. "Now I'm giving you one. You have until sunrise to decide. You can walk out of this building and go back to your father, or you can walk out of this building with me. But if you choose him, you need to understand this. I will not go quietly. I will use Project Nightingale. I will burn his kingdom to the ground to protect my child from him. I swear to God I will." She left him there alone in the dark, in the ruins of the building where their love had begun, with the impossible choice between a corrupt kingdom and an uncertain future. His decision would not only determine his own fate, but the outcome of the war Robert Ashford had so foolishly started. Jennifer didn't have to wait long. As the first light of dawn streaked the sky, her phone buzzed. It was Mark. "I'm downstairs. I made my choice." Her heart pounding, she looked out the window. Not his expensive sports car, but Mark himself stood on the pavement below holding a single duffel bag. He looked up and met her eyes, a clear, resolute expression on his face. He had chosen her. When she let him in, he stepped inside and dropped the bag. "I left my phone, my car, everything," he said, his voice steady. "They can't track me, but we can't just run, Jen. That would let him win. We have to end this face to face." He took her hand, his grip firm. "I need to do this. For us. For our baby." An hour later, they walked unannounced into Robert Ashford's penthouse office. He was standing by the window, a titan surveying his kingdom. He turned his face a mask of cold fury. "Mark, I am dispatching a team to find you." He began, his voice dangerously low. He then fixed his gaze on Jennifer. "And you. You have made a grave mistake." "No," Mark said, stepping in front of Jennifer, shielding her. "The mistake was spending my entire life being afraid of you. But that's over. I'm done." Robert let out a dry, humorless laugh. "A little rebellion. You would throw away your birthright, this empire, for her. This isn't an empire, it's a cage. And you didn't do it for me. You did it for yourselves." Mark's voice for the first time held no trace of fear. "You manipulated me. You used Victoria and a fake pregnancy to try and destroy the mother of your own grandchild. You are a monster." "I am a king," Robert thundered, his composure finally shattering. "I do what is necessary to protect the dynasty." "Then you can rule your kingdom alone," Jennifer said, her voice cutting through the rage. She took a step forward, her eyes locking with his. "Because if you ever try to interfere in our lives, if you so much as breathe in our direction, I will expose Project Nightingale to the world." The name hit Robert like a physical blow. The color drained from his face as he stared at her, then at the son who had clearly betrayed his darkest secret. The fight went out of him instantly. He wasn't a king. He was just a criminal who had been caught. He collapsed into his leather chair, a man utterly defeated, surrounded by a fortune that was now worthless. Mark walked to the vast mahogany desk and placed his company car keys, his wallet full of corporate cards and his office access badge, upon its polished surface. The gesture was quiet, final. "Goodbye, Dad," he said. He took Jennifer's hand, and together they walked out of the office, leaving Robert Ashford alone in his silent, gilded prison. As they stepped out of the tower and into the morning light, They had nothing but a duffel bag and each other. It wasn't the future they had planned, but for the first time, it was truly theirs. And that's where their story truly begins. Not with a storybook ending, but with the difficult, messy, and beautiful reality of starting over. Jennifer and Mark didn't get their perfect wedding, but they found something far more valuable, a chance at a real life free from the toxic control of a man who saw people as pawns. Their journey is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the money you have or the name you carry, but about the courage to walk away from a gilded cage and build your own future brick by brick. It's about choosing love and integrity over power and manipulation. What do you think? Was Jennifer right to use Project Nightingale as a weapon? Could you ever forgive a betrayal like Mark's? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true-to-life stories that you won't forget. Thanks for listening. In the sterile silence of a hospital room, broken only by the frantic beeping of a heart monitor, a woman was fighting for 2 lives, her own and that of her unborn child. Miles away, the man who had promised to cherish her stood beside his lover. Their shared laughter, a cruel counterpoint to her desperate gasps for air. They believed she was broken, a tragic chapter they could simply close and forget. They were wrong. 5 years later, at the reading of a will that would decide the fate of a century-old dynasty, the doors to the grand library swung open. And when everyone saw who stood there, poised and powerful, the laughter died forever. This is the story of how a shattered wife returned from the ashes not just to reclaim her life, but to seize the very empire that had tried to crush her. Blackwood Manor was less a house and more a kingdom carved from Cotswold stone and sprawling green acres. Its history was written in the ivy that scaled its walls and the ancient oaks that stood like sentinels on its lawns. For Evelyn Hayes, marrying Alistair Vance meant becoming the reluctant chatelaine of this formidable estate. She had fallen for Alistair, the charming, ambitious heir, with eyes the colour of a stormy sea, not for the suffocating legacy that came with him. In the beginning, their life had the polished veneer of a fairy tale. He would bring her wildflowers from the meadow and whisper promises against her skin in the vast canopied bed that had belonged to generations of Vance brides. But the gilding on their cage began to flake away, revealing the cold iron beneath. Alistair's affection became conditional, his presence fleeting. His work as a high-level acquisitions manager for the family's global corporation, Vance Industries, became an all-consuming excuse. Dinners grew silent, the cavernous dining hall echoing with the clinking of silverware against porcelain, the space between them as wet and cold as the marble floor. Evelyn, now 6 months pregnant with their first child, a daughter they had decided to name Lily, found herself increasingly isolated. The staff were polite, but distant loyal to the Vance name, not to the outsider who carried its next heir. The true power at Blackwood Manor was not Alistair, but his grandmother, Beatrice Vance. At 84, she was a formidable matriarch, with a mind as sharp as the diamond brooches she favoured, and a gaze that could dissect a person's intentions in a single, sweeping glance. Beatrice ruled the family and its fortune with an iron will forged in an era that valued legacy above all else. She treated Evelyn with a cool, observational civility, her approval a prize Evelyn felt she was constantly failing to win. "A Vance heir requires a strong mother," Beatrice had said one afternoon, over tea, her voice as crisp as old parchment. Sentiment is a luxury. Resilience is a necessity. Evelyn had merely nodded her hand, resting protectively on her swelling abdomen, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. The first time Evelyn heard the name Scarlett Dubois, it was a whisper on a phone call Alistair thought she couldn't overhear. He had stepped out onto the terrace, his voice low and intimate, a tone he hadn't used with Evelyn in months. Scarlett, he explained later, with practiced ease, was a brilliant new consultant from the Paris office, essential to a hostile takeover he was engineering. She was aggressive, sharp, a real asset. He spoke of her with a fire in his eyes that Evelyn realized with a sickening lurch in her stomach was not professional admiration. Soon Scarlett was no longer just a name. She was a presence, an invisible spectre haunting the halls of Evelyn's home. She was the lingering scent of a strange, expensive perfume on Alistair's suit jackets, the late-night text messages that made him smile privately at his phone, the urgent business dinners that stretched into the early hours of the morning. Evelyn tried to deny it, to rationalize it as the paranoia of a pregnant woman whose hormones were in revolt. She wanted to believe in the man she had married, in the life they were supposed to build. She threw herself into preparing the nursery, a sun-drenched room overlooking the rose garden, filling it with soft lamb's wool blankets and hand-painted storybooks. This child, her Lily, would be the anchor to fix their drifting marriage. She would make everything right again. The illusion was irrevocably shattered during the annual Vance Foundation Gala, a lavish affair held in a grand marquee on the manor grounds. Evelyn, feeling large and clumsy in her bespoke maternity gown, watched Alistair across the crowded room. He was standing with a striking woman, whose crimson dress seemed poured onto her statuesque frame. Her hair was a cascade of fiery red curls, and her laughter was loud and unrestrained. It was Scarlett Dubois. Evelyn felt it in her bones. Alistair hadn't even introduced them. He had maneuvered through the evening to keep them apart. But now, as Evelyn watched from the shadows, she saw Scarlett place a perfectly manicured hand on Alistair's chest, her touch lingering far too long to be professional. She leaned in and whispered something in his ear, and Alistair's response was a deep, rumbling laugh, a genuine, unguarded laugh that Evelyn hadn't heard directed at her in over a year. The sight was a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. At that moment, Beatrice Vance appeared at her side, her presence silent and sudden. She didn't look at Evelyn. Her gaze was fixed like a hawk's on her grandson. "Some men," Beatrice said, her voice low and laced with something that sounded like contempt, "mistake a shiny bauble for a crown jewel. They are fools, and they create dynasties of fools." It was the closest thing to an admission of the truth and a strange, cold comfort. Evelyn wasn't just being paranoid. The matriarch of Blackwood Manor saw it too. But seeing it and stopping it were two different things. Later that night, when Alistair finally came to bed, smelling of champagne and Scarlett's perfume, he found Evelyn awake, staring at the ceiling. "Who is she, Alistair?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't feign ignorance. He sighed, the sound heavy with annoyance, not remorse. "Evelyn, please. Don't do this. You're being emotional. It's the pregnancy. Don't you dare use our child as an excuse for your betrayal," she shot back. Sitting up, her heart pounding with a mixture of rage and terror. "There is no betrayal," he said, his voice turning to ice. "Scarlett is a colleague. My focus right now is on securing the firm's future for us, for this family, for our child. You are being hysterical, and frankly, it's unattractive." The word unattractive landed like a slap. He turned his back to her, a clear dismissal, and within minutes he was breathing the even breaths of sleep. Evelyn lay there wide awake in the opulent darkness, a prisoner in her gilded cage, while the ghost of a woman in a crimson dress danced in the ruins of her marriage. The fight for her future hadn't even begun, but she had already sustained her first and most painful wound. The weeks that followed the gala were a slow, agonizing descent into a waking nightmare. Alistair's gaslighting became an art form. Every suspicion Evelyn voiced was twisted into a symptom of her delicate condition. Her valid fears were labeled as hormonal insecurities, her loneliness as neediness. He made her feel as though she were losing her mind, that the truth she saw so clearly was a fiction spun from anxiety. Scarlett, emboldened, grew more audacious. She began calling the manor's landline, her voice a syrupy purr, asking for Alistair under the guise of urgent work matters. Once a courier delivered a package for Alistair, a bespoke suit from a Savile Row tailor. Tucked inside the breast pocket was a small embossed card. Evelyn's hands shook as she read the inscription, "Can't wait to see you out of this one. All my love, S." When Evelyn confronted Alistair holding the card like a piece of radioactive evidence, he flew into a rage. He accused her of violating his privacy, of being a snooping, untrusting wife. He snatched the card, tore it into tiny pieces, and told her it was a tasteless joke from a colleague. "You are letting this obsession ruin us, Evelyn!" he yelled, his face contorted with a fury she had never seen before. "You should be focused on the baby, on your health. Instead, you're manufacturing drama, where there is none." He stormed out, leaving Evelyn standing amidst the confetti of her shredded proof, her heart a block of ice in her chest. The stress began to manifest physically. Her blood pressure, which had been perfect throughout her pregnancy, started to creep dangerously high. Her doctor, a placid man named Dr. Albright, advised bed rest and stress reduction. "The health of your baby depends on your well-being, Mrs. Vance," he'd said kindly, unaware that her well-being was being systematically dismantled within the very walls meant to protect her. Evelyn tried. She spent her days in the nursery reading to the baby in her womb, trying to create a bubble of peace in the suffocating atmosphere of the manor. But the peace was always shattered. One afternoon, while resting in the garden, she overheard two of the younger maids gossiping by the fountain. He bought her a car. One whispered her voice a mix of awe and scandal. A brand-new Aston Martin. Silver. Mr. Davies, the driver, told me. Said he saw them in the city and she was all over him. Shameless, the other replied. And his wife so close to her time. Poor thing. They fell silent as they saw Evelyn, their faces flushing with guilt. Evelyn simply stood up and walked back into the house, their words chasing her like hornets. An Aston Martin. While she was on mandatory bed rest, he was buying another woman a luxury car. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it stole her breath. Her only strange solace was Beatrice. The old woman would summon Evelyn to her private sitting room, a space filled with the scent of dried roses and old books. They never spoke of Alistair's affair directly, but Beatrice's conversation was pointed. She spoke of her own husband, a man known for his philandering ways. Grandfather Vance was a charming man, with a weak spine. Beatrice said one day, her fingers stroking a porcelain figurine, He believed his name gave him license to behave without honor. It is a flaw that I regret has trickled down through the generations. Power does not grant immunity from consequences, Evelyn. It merely delays them. Remember that. It was during these meetings that Beatrice would inquire with sharp precision about Evelyn's health, the baby's development, and even her financial literacy. She'd ask pointed questions about the prenuptial agreement Evelyn had signed without much thought. Did you have your own solicitor review it, or did you simply trust the one Alistair provided? Beatrice asked, her eyes sharp over the rim of her teacup. I trusted the family's solicitor. Evelyn admitted feeling a flush of shame at her own naivety. Beatrice made a small, dismissive sound. Of course you did. You were in love. Love is a notoriously poor business partner. The days bled into one another, each one heavier than the last. Evelyn felt like a ghost haunting her own life. The culmination of this psychological warfare occurred a week before her due date. Alistair announced he had to fly to Zurich for an emergency 2-day conference. The timing was terrible, and Evelyn begged him not to go. "What if I go into labor?" she pleaded, her hands clutching his arm. "You won't," he said, gently prying her fingers away. Dr. Albright said, "You're not showing any signs. And Scarlett has organized the entire summit. My absence would collapse a multi-billion-dollar deal. This is for our future, Evelyn. For Lily's future." He used their daughter's name like a shield, a weapon to quell her dissent. He left the next morning, leaving Evelyn with a perfunctory kiss on the forehead. That evening, a sudden blinding headache seized Evelyn. White spots danced in her vision, and a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She called for the housekeeper, her voice a panicked whisper. Within an hour, she was in an ambulance, the siren wailing as it raced through the quiet country lanes toward the hospital. The diagnosis was swift and terrifying severe preeclampsia. Her blood pressure was skyrocketing to levels that could induce a stroke. It was a life-threatening emergency for both her and the baby. They needed to perform an emergency C-section immediately. As the nurses prepped her for surgery, their faces grim, a wave of terror washed over Evelyn. She was alone. She needed Alistair. A nurse, a kind woman named Mary, took her phone to call him. His phone is going straight to voicemail. "Dear," Mary said, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is there another number?" Evelyn remembered the number for the hotel in Zurich he had left on the kitchen counter. She recited it from memory, her teeth chattering. Mary dialed, putting the phone on speaker so Evelyn could hear. It rang once, twice, then a voice answered. It wasn't Alistair. It was Scarlett. Hello, Scarlett's voice was husky, thick with sleep and annoyance. "I need to speak to Alistair Vance. It's an emergency," the nurse said, her tone clipped and professional. There was a rustling sound, then Scarlett's voice, muffled but clear, speaking away from the phone. "Alistair, darling, it's for you. Some hospital emergency." There was a pause, and then Evelyn heard it, a sound that would be seared into her memory for the rest of her life. Scarlett laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a low, throaty, dismissive laugh, full of smug satisfaction. It was the laugh of a woman lying in a man's bed in a Zurich hotel. A woman who had won. The sound sliced through Evelyn's pain-filled haze clearer than any surgeon's scalpel. In that single cruel sound, she heard the entire truth of her marriage. There was no conference. There was no multi-billion-dollar deal. There was only this, a sordid, cheap affair, for which she and her unborn child were now paying the ultimate price. Alistair's voice finally came on the line, irritated. "What is it, Mr. Vance? Your wife is being taken into emergency surgery," the nurse said sternly. "She has severe preeclampsia. It's critical." There was a beat of silence. Then, "All right. I'll get the first flight I can." He sounded distant, inconvenienced, but Evelyn barely heard him. All she could hear was the echo of that laugh. As the nurses wheeled her gurney towards the operating theatre, the bright overhead lights blurring into streaks, the porcelain facade of her life didn't just crack. It exploded into a million razor-sharp pieces. The pain in her heart was now infinitely greater than the pain in her body. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting against the memory of that laugh. The operating theatre was a world of blinding white light and the sharp, clean scent of antiseptic. Faces in blue masks floated above Evelyn, their voices a low, urgent murmur that seemed to come from a great distance. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was a frantic drum beat counting down the seconds of her life and of Lily's. An anesthesiologist spoke to her in a calm, soothing voice, explaining the spinal block, but the words were a meaningless buzz against the roar in her ears, the roar of betrayal, the echo of Scarlett's laugh. As the numbness spread through the lower half of her body, a strange detachment set in. She was a spectator to her own crisis. She felt a pulling, a pressure, but no pain. Her thoughts, however, were excruciatingly clear. She saw Alistair's face when he lied to her, the smug curl of Scarlett's lip at the gala, the torn pieces of the note from the tailor. Each memory was a shard of glass twisting in her soul. He wasn't on his way. He wasn't rushing to her side. He was in bed with another woman, annoyed that his wife's potential death was interrupting his tryst. "Her pressure is dropping too fast," a voice shouted. "We're losing her." "Another one," echoed. The calm efficiency of the room fractured into controlled chaos. Evelyn's vision began to tunnel, the bright lights dimming at the edges. She felt herself drifting, a sense of profound, weary surrender washing over her. It would be so easy to just let go, to slip away from the pain, from the humiliation, from a life that had become a prison of lies. But then, through the fog, she heard a new sound, a thin, reedy cry. It was the cry of a newborn, fragile but furious, piercing the clinical din of the room. It was Lily. "You have a daughter?" "Evelyn," a nurse said, her voice thick with emotion, her face appearing close to Evelyn's. "She's tiny, but she's a fighter." The sound of Lily's cry was an anchor, pulling Evelyn back from the abyss. A fighter. That one word ignited a spark in the cold, dead ashes of her heart. I have to be a fighter too, for this tiny, helpless person who was depending solely on her. The weariness receded, replaced by a primal, ferocious will to live. She fought to keep her eyes open, fought to breathe, fought to hold on. Lily was whisked away to the neonatal intensive care unit, too premature and fragile to stay with her mother. Evelyn was moved to recovery, her own condition still precarious. For the next 48 hours, she drifted in and out of consciousness, her body waging a silent war against the toxins of the pre-eclampsia. Alistair arrived late the next afternoon. He did not look like a man who had rushed from a business trip. He was impeccably dressed, his hair perfectly coiffed. He carried a bouquet of overpriced hospital gift shop roses. He looked tired, yes, but it was the tiredness of a man whose sleep had been interrupted, not a husband who had spent the night terrified for his wife and child. He sat by her bedside, taking her hand in a grip that felt performative. "Evelyn, my God, you gave us all a scare." The word us was a lie so profound it was almost absurd. There was no us. There was him and Scarlett, and then there was her and Lily. I heard her. Evelyn whispered, her voice a dry rasp. I heard Scarlett laugh. Alistair's face tightened. He dropped her hand. "You were hallucinating, delirious. The drugs, the stress. Evelyn, now is not the time for this. You need to rest, to recover." It was real, she insisted, finding a sliver of strength. I heard her. "You were in bed with her when your child was about to be born." "That's enough," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. He glanced at the door, terrified of being overheard. "You are going to rest, and you are going to drop this paranoid fantasy." I came as soon as I could. I was in meetings. My phone was off. End of story. He was not just a liar. He was a coward. He couldn't even face the truth when she was lying helpless in a hospital bed. He stayed for another 20 minutes, making a show of talking to the nurses before announcing he had to go back to the manor to make some arrangements. He didn't even ask in detail about Lily. The true visitor of consequence arrived the following day. It was Beatrice Vance. She didn't bring flowers. She entered the room with the quiet authority of a visiting monarch, dismissing the attending nurse with a slight nod. She pulled a chair to Evelyn's bedside and sat her back ramrod straight. For a long moment, she simply studied Evelyn, her gaze intense and unreadable. "I spoke with the charge nurse." Beatrice began, her voice devoid of sentiment. "She told me about the phone call to Zurich. She is a discreet woman, but she answered my questions honestly when I assured her it was a matter of family importance." Evelyn felt a tear slide down her temple and into her hair. She didn't have the strength to wipe it away. "So you know," Evelyn whispered. "I know that my grandson is a fool of the highest order, a disgrace to the name he bears." Beatrice said, her voice as cold and hard as granite. "He has proven himself to be not just a faithless husband, but a man devoid of basic human decency. That is an unforgivable failing." She leaned forward slightly. "But this is not about him anymore. This is about you, and about the child, my great-granddaughter. The doctors say you will both recover, that you are both, in their words, fighters." She paused, letting the word hang in the air, just as it had in the operating room. "I have always believed that the Vance legacy is not one of wealth, but of strength, a strength my son lacked and my grandson has spat upon. I have been watching you, Evelyn. I saw your quiet dignity in the face of his infidelity. I see your fight now. And I have made a decision." Beatrice's eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of something new, a strategic fire. "Alistair believes that once you are well, you will return to Blackwood, play the part of the forgiving wife, and raise his heir while he continues his sordid little life. He believes you are weak. He believes his position is secure. I want you to let him believe that. For now." Evelyn stared at her, confused. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that the longest night of your life is over," Beatrice stated. "And a new day is dawning, a day of reckoning. Alistair and that vulgar creature have made a powerful enemy, Evelyn, not just in you, but in me. And I do not lose." Beatrice stood, her movements precise. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a simple, unadorned business card. "This is Arthur Abernathy. He has been my personal solicitor for 40 years. He is loyal to me, not to the family, not to the firm. When you are discharged, you will not be returning to Blackwood Manor. A cottage has been prepared for you and the child on the far side of the estate, a place where you will not be disturbed. You will call Mr. Abernathy. You will follow his instructions to the letter. You will disappear from Alistair's life, and you will focus on two things: raising your daughter and preparing for the war to come." With that, she turned and left as quietly as she had arrived, leaving the business card on the bedside table. Evelyn stared at it, the name embossed in stark black ink. Arthur Abernathy, solicitor. It was more than a card. It was a lifeline. It was a weapon. The longest night was indeed over. The pain, the fear, the betrayal, they were still there. But they were no longer just wounds. They were fuel. As she lay in the quiet hospital room, listening to the steady, reassuring beep of the monitor, Evelyn made a vow. They had laughed while she fought for her life. One day she would have the entire Vance empire, and they would have nothing. The thought didn't bring her joy. It brought her a cold, clear, and unshakable sense of purpose. The fight for Lily's life was won. The fight for their future was just beginning. Alistair accepted Evelyn's decision to move into the estate's old gardener's cottage with surprising ease. He saw it as a victory. In his narrative, Evelyn had suffered a mild postpartum breakdown, a fit of paranoia that required her to have space. The cottage, secluded and miles from the main house, was the perfect solution. It kept her on the property, preserving the veneer of their marriage for society, but effectively removed her from his daily life. It allowed him to install Scarlett Dubois at Blackwood Manor first as a live-in consultant, and then quite brazenly as its unofficial mistress. He thought he was managing a delicate situation with cunning. In reality, he was walking into a meticulously laid trap. The gardener's cottage, renamed Hawthorne Cottage, was no humble shack. Under Beatrice's direction, it had been quietly and luxuriously renovated. It was a sanctuary. Here, hidden from the prying eyes of the main house, Evelyn began the slow process of healing her body and forging her spirit into steel. The first few months were a blur of feeding schedules, sleepless nights, and overwhelming love for the tiny, fragile creature who depended on her for everything. Lily, though born prematurely, was indeed a fighter. She grew stronger each day, her grip tightening around Evelyn's finger. Her blue eyes, Vance eyes, watching her mother with a solemn intensity. This quiet, isolated life was Evelyn's chrysalis. Once a week, a black car would pull up the hidden drive, and Arthur Abernathy would step out. He was a tall, stoic man in his late 60s with kind eyes and a mind like a steel trap. He was Beatrice's most trusted confidant, the architect of her formidable legal and financial fortress. He became Evelyn's teacher. He brought her books, not novels, but texts on contract law, corporate finance, and estate planning. He would sit with her for hours at the small kitchen table while Lily slept in her bassinet nearby, explaining the intricate web of trusts, holding companies, and offshore accounts that constituted the Vance fortune. Beatrice was no fool, Abernathy explained during one of their first sessions. She saw the weakness in her son, and she saw it magnified in Alistair. For decades, she has been restructuring her assets, moving the real power away from the direct lineage and into a series of discretionary trusts. Legally, Alistair owns very little outright. He has a generous allowance, and the illusion of control, but the true ownership, the heart of the empire, rests in a master trust. A trust for which Beatrice is the sole trustee. Evelyn listened, absorbing every word. She learned that the prenuptial agreement she signed was largely irrelevant, as it only pertained to Alistair's personal assets, which were negligible. The real prize was the master trust. And who is the beneficiary of this trust? Evelyn asked. Currently, it is designated for her direct, legitimate descendants, Abernathy said. Upon her death, control was to pass to Alistair. Was being the operative word. Under Beatrice's instruction, Evelyn began her transformation. Abernathy arranged for tutors. A formidable woman named Mrs. Davies, who had once coached CEOs on public speaking, taught Evelyn elocution and presence. She learned to modulate her voice to stand with unshakable poise, to command a room with her stillness. A retired financial analyst from Goldman Sachs taught her how to read a balance sheet, how to spot a hostile takeover, how to understand the ebb and flow of global markets. She became a student of her own life, analyzing her past with cold objectivity. She saw how her desire to be loved had made her blind, how her trust had been a vulnerability Alistair had exploited. The pain of that betrayal never truly vanished, but she learned to transmute it. Grief became focus. Anger became ambition. Meanwhile, at the great house, Alistair and Scarlett were living a life of gaudy excess. They threw lavish parties, redecorated rooms in opulent, tasteless styles, and spent money with a desperation that bespoke their insecurity. They were playing house in a kingdom they did not understand, believing it was theirs by right. To them, Evelyn was a ghost, a half-mad recluse living in a cottage in the woods. They would occasionally see her from a distance, walking with Lily in the gardens, and they would pity her. Their pity was their greatest mistake. Evelyn maintained a single link to the manor Beatrice. Once a month she would take Lily to visit her great-grandmother. These visits were quiet, formal affairs. Beatrice never displayed overt affection, but Evelyn would see her watching Lily with a profound, assessing gaze. She saw in the child the unbroken line of the Vance legacy, a future she could salvage from the wreckage of her grandson's failings. During one visit when Lily was almost 3, Beatrice gave Evelyn a heavy iron key. "This is for the lockbox in my solicitor's office," she said. "It contains the original charter for Vance Industries and my final amended last will and testament. Arthur has the other key. It requires both to open it. When the time comes, you will know what to do." 5 years passed in this manner. 5 years of distant, relentless preparation. Lily grew from a fragile infant into a bright, curious little girl, with her mother's gentle heart and her great-grandmother's sharp eyes. Evelyn transformed from a broken wife into a woman of formidable intellect and quiet confidence. She understood the Vance Empire better than Alistair ever would, because she had studied its foundations while he was merely admiring its gilded facade. Then one cool autumn morning, the call came from Mr. Abernathy. Beatrice Vance had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The news was expected, yet it struck Evelyn with a deep and genuine sorrow. The formidable matriarch had been her unlikely savior, the architect of her resurrection. The funeral was a grand, somber affair, drawing financial titans and society figures from across the globe. Evelyn attended with Lily holding her hand. She stood at the back of the ancient church, a quiet, elegant figure in black. Alistair and Scarlett stood at the front, playing the part of chief mourners. Scarlett, draped in black couture and a ridiculously oversized hat, dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Alistair gave a eulogy full of hollow platitudes about his grandmother's wisdom and legacy words that turned to ash in Evelyn's mouth. After the service, as they stood in the graveyard, Scarlett approached Evelyn for the first time in 5 years. "Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Beatrice was quite a woman." She glanced down at Lily. "Alistair and I do hope that now you will feel you can move on. Find a new life for yourself. We would, of course, provide a generous settlement to see you and the child are comfortable." It was an offer of a payoff, a dismissal. They were trying to buy her off, to finally sweep her out of the picture so they could claim their prize. Evelyn looked directly into Scarlett's eyes, her gaze as cold and clear as a winter sky. "That won't be necessary," she said, her voice calm and level. "I'm quite comfortable where I am." She turned and walked away, leaving Scarlett momentarily speechless, a flicker of unease in her eyes. The ghost she had tried to dismiss had just spoken, and her voice held no fear. The game was about to begin. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Tuesday in the library of Blackwood Manor. The library at Blackwood Manor was the heart of the house, a 2-story cathedral of dark mahogany and leather-bound books that smelled of history and power. A colossal fireplace dominated one wall, its stone mantel carved with the Vance family crest, a hawk clutching a key. It was a room designed for pronouncements for the sealing of fates, and on this grey Tuesday afternoon, the air within it was thick with anticipation. Alistair sat at the head of the long polished table, the position he had long coveted. He looked every bit the new patriarch, dressed in a sombre but impeccably tailored suit. Beside him, Scarlett was a study in predatory stillness. Her mourning attire had been replaced by a sharp, jewel-toned dress that was both expensive and entirely inappropriate for the occasion. She surveyed the room with the proprietary air of a conqueror, her eyes lingering on the priceless paintings and antique furniture mentally redecorating her kingdom. A few distant cousins summoned from the woodwork by the scent of inheritance sat scattered around the table, their expressions a mixture of greed and feigned grief. They were the pawns on the board, irrelevant to the main game. Arthur Abernathy sat at the opposite end of the table, a worn leather briefcase at his side. He adjusted his spectacles, his face an impassive mask that betrayed none of the impending cataclysm. He was waiting. "Well, Arthur." "Shall we begin?" Alistair said, his tone impatient. "I have a board meeting in the city at 4. He was projecting an image of a man already burdened by the weight of his new responsibilities. "We are waiting for one more person," Abernathy replied calmly, his eyes fixed on the grand double doors of the library. Alistair frowned. "Who all the beneficiaries have been notified. It's just family." "Indeed," Abernathy said. Just then the doors swung open. Every head turned. For a moment, there was a collective stunned silence. It was Evelyn, but it was not the Evelyn they remembered. The timid, heartbroken woman who had hidden herself away in a cottage was gone. In her place stood a figure of breathtaking poise and elegance. She wore a simple but exquisitely cut navy blue dress that bespoke quiet wealth, not flashy excess. Her hair was styled in a chic, sophisticated cut, and her face, free of the sorrow that had once clouded it, was serene and confident. Her eyes, clear and direct, held no trace of fear or pain. They held only purpose. Beside her, holding her hand, was Lily, a beautiful, solemn-faced 5-year-old In a velvet dress, her gaze a miniature echo of her mother's intensity. The click of Evelyn's heels on the marble inlay was the only sound in the cavernous room. She walked not with the hesitation of an outcast, but with the measured, confident stride of someone who belonged there. Scarlett was the first to recover a sneer twisting her lips. "Evelyn, what a surprise. I didn't realize you were invited to the main reading. I thought Arthur would arrange a private summary for you. The insult was clear. You are not one of us." Evelyn didn't even glance at her. Her focus was entirely on Abernathy. She gave him a slight, respectful nod. "Mr. Abernathy, I trust we are ready to proceed." Alistair stared, momentarily dumbfounded by her transformation. He saw not the broken wife he had pitied, but a stranger, a beautiful, formidable stranger, a flicker of an old, forgotten attraction, mixed with a new, unsettling sense of alarm. "Evelyn, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "This is a private family matter." "I am family, Alistair," she replied, her voice cool and even. "I am the mother of Beatrice's only great-grandchild." She took a seat at the table directly opposite him, placing Lily in the chair beside her. The symmetry was perfect, the failed heir and his mistress on one side, the disavowed wife and the true bloodline on the other. The battle lines were drawn. Abernathy cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tension. He opened his briefcase and removed a thick, ribbon-bound document. "We are all present. Let us begin. This is the last will and testament of Beatrice Mary Vance, executed on the 11th of September, 2024, 6 weeks ago." He began to read. The preamble was standard, with minor bequests to the staff and the distant cousins. A generous donation was left to the local hospice. Alistair and Scarlett listened with growing impatience, their smugness returning. These were just the opening moves. "Now," Abernathy said, pausing to look over his spectacles at Alistair, "we come to the matter of the primary estate, including Blackwood Manor, all associated properties and controlling interest in the Vance Industries Master Trust." Alistair leaned forward, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. Scarlett placed her hand on his arm, her knuckles white. This was the moment of their coronation. "To my grandson, Alistair James Vance." Abernathy read his voice, a steady monotone. "I leave the sum of £100,000. The silence that followed was absolute. Alistair blinked. 100,000, he repeated, his voice a strangled whisper. That's a mistake. A typo. You mean 100 million? The document is quite clear, Abernathy said, not looking up. I also leave him my late husband's collection of vintage cufflinks in the hope that they might remind him of what it means to be a gentleman, a quality he has so profoundly failed to demonstrate. Scarlett's manicured hand flew to her mouth. The distant cousins gasped. Alistair shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. This is insane. She was senile. Undue influence. This is a farce. Please be seated, Mr. Vance, Abernathy commanded, his voice hardening with authority. There is more. If you contest this will in any way, the no contest clause will be activated, and you will receive nothing. Alistair, pale and trembling with rage, slowly sank back into his chair. Abernathy continued. As for Miss Scarlett Dubois, who has been a frequent guest in my home, I leave her with the following advice. New money, shouts, but true wealth whispers. I trust she will find her own way in the world, as she will no longer be finding it with the Vance family's resources. To her, I leave nothing. Scarlett let out a small choked gasp, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Abernathy turned a page. And now the residuary clause. All the rest residue and remainder of my estate, both real and personal, including but not limited to Blackwood Manor, and its contents my controlling shares in Vance Industries, held within the Beatrice M. Vance Master Trust, and all financial accounts I give, devise, and bequeath as follows. He paused, lifting his gaze to meet Evelyn's. To a new irrevocable trust to be named the Lily Vance Legacy Trust. The sole beneficiary of this trust is to be my great-granddaughter, Lily Evelyn Vance. The assets are to be managed for her benefit, education, and well-being until her 25th birthday, at which point she will assume full control. Alistair looked on, utterly defeated, but a tiny flicker of hope remained. A trust for Lily. He was her father. He would control it. But Abernathy wasn't finished. He delivered the final devastating move. The checkmate. To manage this trust, to execute its duties with full and absolute authority, I appoint a sole trustee. This individual will have complete control over all assets, voting rights, for all shares, and will be the sole resident and guardian of Blackwood Manor. She will receive a handsome annual salary and have ultimate discretion in all matters pertaining to the estate and the company. That sole trustee is Mrs. Evelyn Hayes Vance. The words hung in the air, electric and immutable. Sole trustee, Mrs. Evelyn Hayes Vance. For a full 10 seconds the library was utterly silent, the occupants frozen as if in a tableau. The only movement was Lily, who, oblivious to the monumental shift in power, was quietly tracing the patterns on the mahogany table with her small finger. Then the silence shattered. Alistair let out a sound that was half laugh, half strangled sob. No. No, it's not possible. She can't. The housekeeper, maybe. You, Arthur. But her. She knows nothing. He pointed a shaking finger at Evelyn, his face a mottled canvas of purple and white. Scarlett was the first to find her voice, and it was a shriek of pure, unadulterated fury. This is a joke, a sick, twisted joke by a bitter old woman. This mousy little nobody cannot be in charge of anything. We'll fight this, we'll drag you through every court in the country. Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at Scarlett, her expression one of mild pity. On what grounds, she asked, her voice cutting through Scarlett's hysteria with surgical precision. Beatrice was certified of sound mind by 3 independent physicians a week before she signed this will. Mr. Abernathy and 2 senior partners from his firm were witnesses. There was no undue influence. In fact, I had not seen Beatrice for 6 weeks prior to her passing. The will is ironclad. Isn't that right? Mr. Abernathy gave a curt nod. It is the most legally fortified document I have ever had the privilege of drafting. He then turned his steely gaze on Scarlett. And Miss Dubois, you have no legal standing to contest anything. You are not family. You are not mentioned as a beneficiary. In the eyes of the law and this estate, you are nothing. The word nothing struck Scarlett with the force of a physical blow. Her rage dissolved into a desperate panic. She turned to Alistair, her carefully constructed mask of sophistication crumbling to reveal the grasping avarice beneath. Alistair, do something. This is your birthright. She's stealing it from you. From us. Alistair, his face ashen, rose from his chair and staggered around the table toward Evelyn. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic, wheedling desperation. He dropped to his knees beside her chair, a gesture so demeaning and unexpected that even the distant cousins recoiled. "Evelyn!" "Evie," he pleaded, reaching for her hand. She moved it away before he could touch it. "Please, you don't understand this world. The company, the finances, it will crush you. Let me help. We can run it together. For Lily. Think of Lily. We can be a family again. I'm sorry. I was a fool. I know that now. It was a mistake, all of it. It was a pathetic last-ditch performance, a desperate grab for the power he had just lost. 5 years ago, those words might have shattered her. Now they were meaningless. She looked down at the man kneeling at her feet, the man whose laughter with his mistress had nearly cost her everything, and she felt nothing but a profound and final emptiness. She stood up, forcing him to look up at her. For the first time, he was literally beneath her. A family, she said, her voice dangerously soft. You speak of family now. When you were in a hotel bed in Zurich, while our daughter was fighting for her first breath. When you allowed that woman. She flicked her eyes toward Scarlett, to live in my home, to sleep in my bed, to spend the money meant for your child's future on couture and sports cars. You destroyed our family, Alistair. You burned it to the ground. She paused, letting her words sink in. And you are wrong. I do understand this world. Beatrice and Mr. Abernathy have made sure of that. For the past 5 years, while you were playing the lord of the manor I was studying, I understand every trust, every stock, every loophole. I understand the power I now hold. Power that you will never touch again. She looked over at Mr. Abernathy. The will grants me sole residency of Blackwood Manor. Correct? Effective immediately? That is correct. Mrs. Vance, he affirmed. Evelyn's gaze swept over Alistair and Scarlett. Her voice was no longer soft. It was clear, commanding, and absolute. The voice of the new matriarch. You have 1 hour to pack a single bag each and vacate the premises. The head of security will escort you to the gate. Any personal belongings left behind will be disposed of. Any attempt to contact me or my daughter will be met with a restraining order. Any attempt to access company funds will be treated as theft. Alistair stared at her, his mouth agape. Vacate Evelyn. This is my home. Not anymore, she said simply. Scarlett, seeing her future of wealth and status evaporate before her eyes, lunged forward. You bitch! She screamed, her face a contorted mask of hate. You manipulative, scheming bitch! Before she could take 2 steps, 2 uniformed security guards who had been standing discreetly by the door moved to intercept her, each taking an arm in a firm, professional grip. Mr. Abernathy anticipated there might be some emotional difficulty, Evelyn stated calmly. Please escort Miss Dubois to her room so she can pack. As they dragged a screaming, cursing Scarlett from the library, Evelyn turned her attention back to the broken man on the floor. Get up, Alistair, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Have some dignity. He slowly, shakily got to his feet. He looked around the room at the portraits of his ancestors, at the books that lined the walls at the crest above the fireplace. He looked at it all as if seeing it for the first time, and for the last. Why, he whispered, his voice cracking. Why would she do this to me? Her own grandson. Evelyn finally gave him his answer, the one Beatrice had armed her with years ago. Because she despised weakness more than anything. She told me once that power doesn't grant immunity from consequences, it only delays them. Your consequences have arrived, Alistair. She didn't do this to you. She did it for Lily. She was preserving the Vance legacy by placing it in the hands of someone who understands its value, not just its price. The phoenix had risen. Not in a blaze of fiery, vengeful glory, but with the cold quiet and unstoppable force of justice. As Alistair was escorted out of the library by another guard, a defeated man stripped of everything he had taken for granted, Evelyn walked to the grand bay window overlooking the gardens. She picked up her daughter, holding her close. Lily rested her head on her mother's shoulder, and together they looked out over their new kingdom. The battle was over. The reign was just beginning. In the hour that followed, Blackwood Manor underwent a swift and silent purge. There was no drama, only the quiet efficiency of Evelyn's will. Alistair, a dazed ghost in his own life, and Scarlet, reduced to sputtering rage, were escorted from the grounds with a single bag each. Evelyn didn't watch them go. She was in the library with Mr. Abernathy, signing the documents that officially transferred an empire into her hands. Her signature, once timid, was now a firm, confident slash of ink. Her first orders were simple: change every lock and air out the master suite. Every trace of them was to be gone. Her reign began not with vengeance, but with control. Days later, she convened an emergency board meeting for Vance Industries. The men on the video call who remembered her as Alistair's quiet wife expected a figurehead. Instead, they faced a strategist. From Beatrice's chair, Evelyn systematically dismantled Alistair's failing pet project, citing financial data and contractual flaws he had clearly never understood. This project is a vanity play. She stated, her voice calm but absolute. We are terminating it. My office will circulate a new proposal this afternoon. The board's stunned silence was her coronation. Life at the manor transformed. The oppressive atmosphere of deceit was replaced by peace. Evelyn began erasing the scars of Scarlet's gaudy taste, restoring the home's quiet elegance. Her true focus, however, was Lily. They had breakfast in the sun-drenched conservatory and walked the gardens in the afternoon. Evelyn was determined that her daughter would be raised with love, not entitlement, understanding the responsibility of her name without its suffocating weight. One evening, Mr. Abernathy approached her on the terrace. "The audits are complete," he said quietly. "Alistair and Miss Dubois embezzled a significant amount. We have more than enough to press criminal charges." Evelyn looked out at the sunset, painting the sky. Sending Alistair to prison would be a final public humiliation, a harsh justice. She thought for a long moment before giving her answer. "No," she said softly. "Let it go." "But Mrs. Vance," he protested, "he stole from his own daughter's inheritance, and he lost everything because of it." She replied, "His name is ruined. He has no fortune, no home, and Scarlet left him the moment the money was gone. He is irrelevant. For a man like Alistair, that is a fate far worse than prison." Beatrice wanted to preserve the legacy, not destroy the man. Her reign would not be defined by the man who wronged her, but by the future she was building. The laughter of the mistress was a faded echo. The wife who fought for her life was a memory. In her place stood the matriarch of Blackwood Manor, her hand held firmly by the little girl for whom she had conquered a kingdom. Evelyn's story is a powerful testament to the idea that true strength is not the absence of pain, but the courage to rise from it, stronger and wiser than before. She transformed betrayal into a lesson, heartbreak into a fortress, and victimhood into ultimate victory. She reminds us that justice doesn't always arrive like a clap of thunder. Sometimes it's a quiet, meticulous plan, executed with breathtaking precision. Her journey from a hospital bed where her life hung by a thread to the head of a boardroom where an empire hung on her every word is a story of incredible resilience. What do you think was the most satisfying moment of her revenge? Was it the reading of the will or her quiet decision not to press charges, proving she was above their petty games? If Evelyn's story of triumph over treachery moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And for more unforgettable stories of karma, justice, and empowerment, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.